going live, going live, going live, going. We are live. Hey there, students. Tom Richey here with some AP Euro review. And what's going on? My goodness, that is crooked as all get out. Okay, so as far as that goes, you know what? If it's going to be crooked, it's going to be crooked. Can't do anything about that. So we will go ahead and, again, I'm just having a little bit of trouble seeing myself here, but y'all are saying y'all can see me. So we're just going to go with that. So with that, we're going to be focusing on the Renaissance and the Reformation. Those are going to be the priorities for questions. Now you can go to the Q&A and you can submit questions, and that's going to work for you. We've got Louis the 14th, the Sun King, and Martin Luther. I am the Reformation. How about that? Yeah, I think on YouTube, I think you can get that merch on YouTube that's got one of these mugs there. One of my favorite mugs has got a little cartoon of me on it that Mr. Betts' class made. So as far as that goes, oh, Huey P. Long has crashed the party here as well. So y'all remember, y'all ask questions if y'all would like to. Remember, the focus areas are the Renaissance and the Reformation. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and kind of get started here. And one thing that I would make a note of is I've got plenty of review guides that I've created recently. Let me go ahead and give y'all a link here. Okay, let me go ahead and show y'all some guides that are relevant here to kind of start off. And again, hey to everybody in YouTube. And if you're here on YouTube, just note here that, you can go to the description and you can click to join us on Crowdcast. Okay, but I want YouTube folks to know that we're going to send love over there as well. So going from there, somebody's comparing me to Theo Von again. I think I'm like an educated version of Theo Von, if I've heard people say that correctly. I'm also from Louisiana, incidentally. That is the state of my birth is Louisiana. So with that, I've never watched any of this guy's videos. So with that, let me go ahead and direct y'all to a page here that I'm going to go ahead and share in the chat. These are some review guides that I made for Marco Learning in the past like year or two. Okay, a lot of them. Now I am sharing my screen. Okay, and hopefully y'all are able to see the screen. Okay, let me know if y'all are able to see the screen. There's just a little issue where I'm not able to see myself, but as far as that goes, I think we're good. So these review guides, again, marcolearning.com/AP Euro. These are several review guides that I've created that I think that you'll find helpful. And this here, we see that we've got the Italian Renaissance, okay, which is, the first thing we're really going to study, right? And what is the Renaissance? Okay, so we're thinking about the Renaissance. The Renaissance as a whole represents a rebirth of classical antiquity. Now, what do we mean by classical? When we're thinking about classics, we're thinking about ancient Greece, ancient Rome. Now, I also will include biblical literature because I think when we think about like classical literature is Greek, Roman, and biblical literature. Okay, but as far as that goes, when we think about like the classics, classical architecture, anything that is coming from ancient Greece and Rome. Now, the Renaissance is kind of an arbitrary time to start modernity. But at the same time, like when we're thinking about this, they're looking back to Greece and Rome, but they're also seeing themselves as distinct from the Middle Ages. Also, we can see that capitalism is starting to develop. Now, when we talk about capitalism, what we mean is an economy that is based on the exchange of money, okay? Private ownership, individualistic to a point, and the exchange of money. Whereas when we look at a feudal economy, the feudal system of the Middle Ages, that was, if you're thinking about how do we measure wealth? In the feudal system, how much land do you have? Whereas in the capitalist system, which is the system that we have today, does anybody really care how much land Elon Musk owns or Jeff Bezos owns? No, you care about what do they have that could be converted into cash, okay? Not necessarily cash on hand, but what assets do they have that could be converted into cash? Now, the city-state of Florence. That's something that is going to be important. Now, Florence was not a city with a direct port, but it is, it was overshadowed in the Middle Ages by Venice, and to a certain extent Genoa. So as far as that goes, now these guides here that we've got humanism. Now, what is humanism? This is something that is very, very important for us to understand. That first of all, like when we think about humanism, that it is an educational curriculum that's focused on the study of the classics, history, philosophy, literature of Greece and Rome, and of course the Bible as well. So when we're thinking about humanistic studies, we're talking about the studies of the classics. Now, also, humanism is often, put into the context of a more human-centered thinking, okay? That it is, now, one thing that we have to note here is that more recent historians have noted that the secularism of the Renaissance, it's been a little overstated in the past. Now, what we want to note here, if we went back to Renaissance Italy and we were thinking about, is this a secular society? This is not something that we would think like, okay, this is secular. In fact, we might be like, what do you smell there? What's that burning? Oh, that's a heretic burning at the stake who denied the divinity of Jesus Christ or something like that, right? And so secularism, though, by comparison to the Middle Ages, that we start to see, and again, the Renaissance is kind of this beginning of modern Europe, and we see the beginnings of secularism, okay? So the church is still very, very much established, and a lot of Renaissance art has religious themes because the church is patronizing a lot of this art. But we do want to note that there is the beginning of a secularism that steadily grows throughout the next, the next 600, 600 years. So with that, the developing of the printing press results in the mass production of classical text. And then we see here that it weakens the Catholic Church's control over information, and the church having less control over intellectual life. The Medici family, we want to note patronage, that sort of thing. Also, when it comes to Italian Renaissance art, we want to be thinking about the classical themes. When we're looking at this here, that is, the linear perspective, that these, even though it's a 2D surface, it looks 3D. These people are bigger than these people, and it looks very convincing. This is an innovation of Renaissance art, is to make a 2-dimensional surface into a 3-dimensional surface. Now, this is the School of Athens by Raphael. Now, with this, we want to note here again, your course and exam description mentions the naturalism of Renaissance art, meaning that these people look like real people. Now, not that, they're not kind of idealized when we look at Diogenes here sitting on the steps. I mean, philosophers typically aren't that ripped, but at the same time, like the proportions, the obsession with proportions and that sort of thing. Now, there's a handout that I think would be helpful for you if I just search for Sistine works of Renaissance art. You get it? Ha, 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 little pun. I'm sort of making a joke here. So with that, let me note here. Yeah, so this is what will come up here. Now, Sistine, I just, use that a little play on words. I've got 16 works of Renaissance art here. Now, it's not important that you know the name of, the artist of all 16. But what I've done here is I have assembled, some works of Renaissance art that I believe are important. And because of that, we note here that you see linear perspective and chiaroscuro, which is, giving additional light to the subject. So when you're looking here, you see the linear perspective, that this is set up to where there are points that encourage you to focus on the face of Jesus Christ. Whereas, then we see the points there and also the lighting. The chiaroscuro is the background. It's kind of like a vignette filter that you would put on an Instagram post or something like that. Speaking of Instagram, I'm going to be giving shout outs to people who are following me on Instagram at Tom Richey, okay, that occasionally during the broadcast, I will be giving shout outs to Instagram followers. So, and note the religious subject matter as well. A lot of these will have religious subject matter. Now, we note here the prevalence of classical architecture, architecture that is based on Greek and Roman architecture, where you see here Brunelleschi's dome. Okay, now a large dome had not been completed in Europe ever since the fall of Rome. People had forgotten how to do it. And so Brunelleschi, through reading classical text on architecture and mathematics, he decides, this is how we're going to do it. And he successfully puts together a very, very large dome. Now, then we see Donatello's David. Now, what makes this Renaissance? Well, David is a biblical figure. And then we also see here that David is portrayed nude in the classical style. So we have really the Renaissance, although as much as we talk about secularism, it's really a combination of the classics, the Greek and Roman classics, and this biblical tradition that are coming together. Now, note that this is a product of Medici patronage. We want to note patronage. These are the people who are giving the artist, giving the artist funds, giving the artist support, and they're making the art possible. The Medici family and the church were very large patrons of the arts. Now, another thing about Medici patronage, the adoration of the Magi, okay? Botticelli's adoration of the Magi, which is, you can see here that this is a Botticelli, and we see that it is at face value a religious painting, but when we look at, you've got the baby Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and Saint Joseph, but then the Magi, one of these three wise men who is coming to adore the Christ child, he is even though Cosimo de Medici is dead by this time, people would have seen his face, on coinage and other things. So it's Cosimo de Medici, kind of the godfather of the Medici family, who gets to adore the Christ child. Now, you see Lorenzo de Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent, who was a very, very enthusiastic patron of the arts and philosophy. And then you see here, this is believed to be Botticelli, breaking the proverbial fourth wall, so to speak, that Botticelli is looking at you. Now, one thing we want to note about the Renaissance, especially the Italian Renaissance, is the individualism. That we see here, that the artist is expressing pride in his work. In the Middle Ages, the artist was really just another craftsman, and typically you wouldn't know who the artist was. But in this case, we see Botticelli, I am the artist. I want you to know who did this. And so then, of course, Botticelli also responsible for the birth of Venus. Now, what you see here is purely a matter of Greek mythology, where we see Venus coming up out of the sea. That's got actually kind of an interesting story if any of y'all ever want to look into that. Then here, since we're focusing on the Reformation as well, let me go ahead. And again, the reason that I picked these works isn't necessarily, I think if you remember 3 or 4 of them, that's going to be fine. But I'm picking these in terms of artistic significance and also when we get a teachable moment. Now, Perugino, who was Raphael's teacher, this is the delivery of the keys. Now, what we see here is that it is depicting a scene from the Gospels where, Peter, Jesus's disciple, Jesus asks him, "Who do you say that I am?" Okay. And he says that you are the Christ. And Jesus is so satisfied with his answer that he says, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not overcome it. What you shall bind on earth, I shall bind in heaven. what you shall loose on earth, I shall loose in heaven. Basically, Peter, you're my guy, and I am going, you, when I'm not here anymore, you're the guy. Now, that's how Catholics interpret this, okay? And also, based on Catholic tradition, Peter becomes the first pope. Now, Jesus, probably never handed Peter St. Peter actual keys, okay? But at the same time, we see here that this is made for even though literacy is increasing during the Renaissance, still a fair amount of illiterate people that, this is shown them. They look at it, and it's like, there's Jesus giving the keys to Peter. And again, this is where, according to the Catholic Church, the Pope's authority comes from. In fact, if you go to the Vatican's website, let's see, Vatican website. Okay, so the Pope has a website. All right, so we see here, if we go to the Pope's website, what are we going to see? Well, it's not as prominent here, but there are the keys. All right, so let's see what happens if we yep, the coat of arms of Pope Francis, you see the keys, okay? So I want to note the significance of this in terms of the Reformation, because Martin Luther and other Protestant reformers, they are going to dispute this account. They are going to dispute that the Pope, as head of the Catholic Church, has jurisdiction over all Christians. And that is one of the biggest things about the 95 Theses. Now, note Erasmus, who actually have a portrait of Erasmus on this, on the thing. Erasmus was a Northern Renaissance humanist, okay? And Erasmus wrote The Praise of Folly, in which he, like Martin Luther, he criticized the Catholic Church for its corruption, its corrupt practices. But one thing we want to note about Erasmus, the Northern humanist, Erasmus didn't agree with Luther. He didn't ever question Catholic doctrine, and he never questioned the primacy of the Pope. Whereas, Luther did both of those things. Now, Erasmus and Luther also had some disagreements when it came to free will. So with that, I've got now also note the Northern Renaissance art, okay? Notice that now here, the Northern Renaissance art tends to be a bit more, here is a regular situation, okay? So when we look at Italian Renaissance art, you think okay, the school of Athens, let's get a bunch of philosophers and Plato and Aristotle and Diogenes and Socrates, all of these other classical philosophers, and let's put them in a magnificent, classical venue, and let's make this as big and as grand as possible. Now, Northern Renaissance art, you're more likely to see stuff like this. Here are a bunch of peasants just kind of working in the fields, and some of them taking a break, some of them baling on the hay and all of that. And so just basically a more, let me paint peasant life, okay? That's not something you really see in the Italian Renaissance art. That's more of a Northern Renaissance art thing. But notice that it's still, you see the linear perspective, okay? So the styles are largely the same. And then you see that it's there's an effort to make realistic depictions of people. So with that, I've got a few study aids. One of the things that I like to do here in these live sessions is to make sure that you have access to some study material. So Sistine Works of Renaissance Art, you can Google that. You can go to my website and find that. And then, of course, on the marcolearning.com/AP Euro, we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're up to 10 review guides that I've designed here specifically for students of AP European history. And you'll note that most of these are focused on the early periods, okay? But we do have a few that have gone, I have designed a few that, were designed from there. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, as far as that goes, let me actually try to, I don't want to mess anything up, okay? So I tell you, GOAT FR, GOAT for real, okay? So as far as that goes, we see here that, thank you, Katie, for sharing that. Now, with that, I want to, as we get into humanism, I do want to talk a bit about Pico Pico della Mirandola and the Oration on the Dignity of Man. Okay, that's something that I think is a very, very important primary source and kind of understanding what we deal with in terms of humanist philosophy. Okay, so let me go ahead and just see what we've got here. Humanism in the Italian Renaissance. Okay. So Pico della Mirandola, all right, he was basically an Italian nobleman, and he was a good friend of Lorenzo de Medici. Okay, Lorenzo de Medici, and Lorenzo was a very, very prominent patron of the arts. And Pico della Mirandola, rich guy, really liked Plato and all kinds of other philosophy. And one thing, if you want to know like Lorenzo's commitment to the arts and philosophy, Pico was traveling through Florence. He had some really grandiose visions. Pico wrote 900 theses. Now, Martin Luther only wrote 95. Pico wrote 900. And he wanted to convene a council of scholars to meet in Rome. And this council of scholars, he believed, was going to be such a big deal that it was going to bring about the second coming of Christ. Okay. Oh goodness, it is let's see. Let me see here what okay, so the screen is black now. Let's see. So okay, the stage is empty. I don't know. Let's see. So backstage yeah, let's see. I don't know. Let me see. Y'all can still hear me but can't see me. Is that where we are now? Let's see. So the wing, let's see, the wing, stage controls, put everyone, okay. I don't know where that, what's happening there. Let's see. Okay, I'm here. Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm here. Let's see. Could you send me a picture of the screen? What you're seeing. So with that, sorry about that. Just a little glitch. I don't think it's affecting y'all. Okay, so I think are we fine there? Can you see me? Can you? Okay. So I think it's still okay. It still thinks that I'm screen sharing. Okay, so let me go ahead and not let this thing down. But Pico, he was going to convene this council of scholars in Rome, and he believed that it was going to be such a big deal. It was going to bring about the second coming of Christ. Like Jesus was literally going to come back, when this council of scholars convened. And on the way to this council of scholars, that Pico gets a little bit distracted, and he's going through Florence, and he has an interaction, let's call it an interaction, with Lorenzo de Medici's cousin's wife. Now, Lorenzo de Medici's cousin, I mean, he's a member of the Medici family. It's a big deal. And adultery at that time was punishable by death. Again, this was a society that was still very, very much grounded in traditional Catholic teaching. And so, Pico gets thrown in jail, but then Lorenzo goes and talks to his cousin. And he says, he's a philosopher. You're going to have to let him go. And Pico goes. And, that's, when Lorenzo was dying, he told Pico, I wish that I could live a little bit longer so that I could help you finish your library. I mean, I love Lorenzo de Medici and Pico. But anyway, as far as that goes, what we want to understand here is how Renaissance humanism, they are saying that, look, the Christian tradition, the classical tradition, all of these other traditions, it's very common today to hear somebody say that the religions of the world are all pointing in the same direction. That's what you would call syncretism, okay? Some people call this the manifesto of the Renaissance, okay? So, Pico gives his introduction to his 900 theses, and he says, most esteemed fathers, I have read in the ancient writings of the Arabians that Abdallah the Saracen, on being asked what on this stage, so to say, of the world, seemed to him the most evocative of wonder, replied that there was nothing to be seen more marvelous than man, Now, note here, what is he leading with? He's actually leading the writings of the Arabians, Abdallah the Saracen, which is a word for, a medieval word for a Muslim. So he's starting off actually by invoking a Muslim scholar. And he says there's nothing more marvelous than man. Now, then he says, and that celebrated exclamation of Hermes Trismegistus, what a great miracle is man, Asclepius, confirms this opinion. Now, we see in the writings of the Arabians, the writings of the Greeks, they agree here. Okay, so that's what Pico's doing. They agree here. And this is something that is very, very major, because it's something that typically, now when you look at like Catholic theology and original sin, and then the so-called great chain of being in the Middle Ages, Catholics did not in the Middle Ages consider man to be at the top of God's creation. Now, whereas in the Quran, for example, it has a passage where God tells the angels to bow down, to kneel down before Adam. And so this is something, and of course, that's like portrayed as the rift between, God and Satan, is that he says, I don't need to bow to this man, that he's beneath me. Why do I need to do that? And, God's, well, I told you to. And so as far as that goes, that Pico he's going to incorporate some Christian thinking, but it's also tied in with some other things here. And so, now note here when he says God the Father, the mightiest architect. Now note here when he says God the Father, he is referring to God as Christians refer to God. So then he refers to Moses, okay, the prophet of the Bible, and Timaeus, which is a work of Plato. And he comes to the conclusion that man, and of course he identifies Adam as the first man. So this is coming from, from Christian traditions. And, so with that, what makes man so great, so much greater than the angels? Well, the thing is that the angels, they may kind of think of themselves as higher because they're spirit and all of that, but an angel does not have free will. Okay, so when he says here, oh, unsurpassed generosity of God the Father, oh, wondrous and unsurpassable felicity of man, to whom it is granted to have what he chooses, to be what he wills to be. And so this is something that is important in the sense that it identifies this Italian Renaissance humanism with, with the existence of free will. Okay, and that's something that is, that is important here. And so, as far as that goes, now Mordecai, I'm going to note here, you don't necessarily need to know each author, okay? So now, or not each artist. Now, if you know something by Palladio or Rubens, that's going to be great for you. That's not going to be a bad thing. That's going to be excellent. But it's not so much about that a certain, a certain person, but in their work, but that you are able to explain using a specific example. So you could use Rubens, you could use Michelangelo, you can use all kinds of different, of different things there. So going from that, let's go ahead and see if there are any questions. Now, also, speaking of Pico della Mirandola, I have got a rap for Pico della Mirandola. It is on my SoundCloud. Now, I don't like to presume that y'all want to hear me rap, okay? But I do have my SoundCloud here. That's if you just type in Tom Richey SoundCloud, that is there. But I don't want to presume. So let's just see in the chat. I mean, I don't want to let, people are like, why is this guy rapping? With this, I'm not a rapper. Now, speaking of, let me run over to Instagram and note Olivia Hayden 10, Annie _land_ Daisy Ailman 9, Ada-licious 2, okay. Will Wagner 606, Michelle 70283, Salty Cheeser, that person that exists. That sounds very much like some existentialism, Kierkegaard, and Jean-Paul Sartre. Interesting, okay. So we see here Andy Kwan, Shanna Monas, Lauren Marie P, Cindy Bo underscore Jared period Stoner. Is that like a last name or okay? Katie Y4. Okay, great. And there's some folks there. Rosie, all right, cute dog you got there, Rosie. Swaggy Sam, okay, liked a post. Thank you, Swaggy Sam. It's like Swaggy Sam. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and thank the people for the follows, and let me see what the chat's doing as far as do y'all want to see the wrapping or not. Let's see. Let me go ahead and just check out the new messages here. Okay, y'all do. Oh, you've never been this happy. Okay, another. Oh, okay, y'all are getting some shout outs there. So it looks like y'all might want to wrap. Okay, so remember, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do some more Instagram shout outs. So there are over 250 people here. So, we've got plenty of time for some more Instagram shout outs. So y'all want to hear me rap. So this is a rap I made about Pico della Mirandola a few years ago. Okay. So we're going to, I guess since y'all want to hear that we will, we'll go ahead and not disappoint. And as far as that goes, I think that my screen is probably, sorry about the thing with the screen. We're going to figure out what the deal is sometime in the future there. But y'all can still hear me fine. So let's go ahead and get this rap going. All right. Hey, there's go. Oops, I missed that. Oh gosh. So let me try that one more time. Okay. All right. We got this. All right. Hey there, it's Pico, the Count of Mirandola. Popes want to burn all my popes with a candle. Branding my ideas as false and demented. Heretical nonsense that shouldn't be printed. Pundits don't like it at all when I seek to merge Christian ideals with the works of the Greeks. Prolific, just hand me a pen and I thrive with 900 theses, not just 95. I want to convene a great council of scholars. I'll pay your expenses in florins, not dollars. Join me in Rome, don't get lost on the way, for Christ will return to hear just what I'll say. Choirs of angels, they sing and it's beautiful. They only sing because God makes them dutiful. Don't be awed by their wondrous wings. They're not on the top of God's great chain of being. Despite what the medieval idiots said, here's my manifesto, now let it be read. The trees and the angels are part of God's plan, but the greatest of God's miracles is a man. Angels, like rodents, must be what they'll be, and the tree cannot be anything but a tree. Let's hear an oration on man's dignity, and you won't find an angel who's freer than me. When all else was made, it was man's turn to enter. God showed him his place. It was right at the center. You doubt me? Just look at the classics and see. The biblical authors and Plato agree. Remember the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. Man is a miracle. That's what he said to us. God said to Adam, I've set you apart. I saved you for last, but knew right from the start that you are a being who will understand me. And you can be anything you want to be. Your place is not fixed. You alone have a choice to be free, to be human, to use your own voice. I regret I died young and I never reached Rome. If you're there for the council of scholars, go home. The Lord's second coming will just have to wait until some other time or some later date. I give all thanks to Lorenzo, my patron, who saved me when caught with a Medici matron. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate y'all, indulging me on that. And so with that, let's go ahead and go into the Q&A. Let's see what we've got here. Okay. So one thing that we're going to note here is that there will not be a DDQ on the Renaissance. Okay, the DDQ starts at at 1600. So if you a DDQ, let's see here. I gotta get this thing straight. What's going on here? Let's see if we can get this thing. This thing is so crooked. And remember, Renaissance art is about symmetry and that sort of thing there. So with that, let's go ahead and, so if you get something, it's probably going to be like the 30 Years' War, late Reformation, but there was one on that recently. So remember, 1600's the beginning. Now, the context, is really about the prompt. Historical context is about the prompt. You never really know for sure what the historical context is until you see the prompt. So just understand now, the Renaissance will never be something that is the topic of the DBQ, but it can be used as historical context. But again, you can kind of, look at those and kind of think about what's going to work for you. But then at the same time, you also need to be thinking in terms of, look at the prompt and then decide the context, because the context really kind of needs to lead to your thesis. Okay. So as far as that goes, I wouldn't puzzle over the difference between naturalism and realism. It's just basically both of the, if somebody uses the term naturalism, it's just they're making things appear in a real kind of way there. Okay. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, what were key factors now let me see here. What happens if, well, I don't want to leave the state. Yeah, it's frustrating that this thing's not working. All right. So as far as that goes, when I'm asked, how did the Renaissance lead to the Reformation? One thing we want to note that Luther in the Reformation talks about sola scriptura, right? That Christianity, Christian doctrine, and Christian beliefs should be based only on the Bible. Now, one thing that we can note here, if we're contextualizing, the Reformation with the Renaissance, is the Reformation the Renaissance led to an increase in literacy and an interest in classical text. Okay, so the idea of Christianity being fundamentally based on the Bible, the Bible as the main body of doctrine. Now, the scriptures have always been sacred in Christianity, but as far as the role that the Bible plays on this all-encompassing role in Protestant Christianity, I would say that this goes back to the increase in literacy that we see in the increase in literacy that we see in the Renaissance, and also the increase in interest in classical text. Okay, that's something that is going to be important as well. So with that, let's see, the author, let's see. So with that, what was the role of the Book of Common Prayer? Okay, so Emily, you've got a question about the English Reformation and thinking about the Book of Common Prayer. Now, that is something as far, it looks like I might be on the full screen again. Awesome. Okay, y'all can see me on the full screen. That's great. So the Book of Common Prayer, that was written by Thomas, oh my goodness, there are so many Thomases. I'm drawing a blank. I'm thinking Malthus, the guy with the principle of population. Thomas Cranmer. Okay, yeah, Thomas Cranmer. Now, again, not necessarily, but again, it took me a second. But Thomas Cranmer wrote the Book of Common Prayer to be the service book of the Church of England. So what we want to note here when we're thinking about the Church of England is that the Book of Common Prayer, to somebody who is just kind of casually, like let's say that you were raised Baptist or you're not a Christian at all, if you go into a Catholic or a Protestant or a Catholic or an Anglican service, then it's not going to look very different. Okay, the Catholic service is not going to look fundamentally different from the Anglican service. Now, if you're a Catholic or an Anglican, you would know. Okay, you would be able to see like, okay, that's something that is, that's something that I would be able to tell. But when you're thinking about this, the Book of Common Prayer, the service book. Now, we want to talk about Anglicanism, is that Anglicanism is the most conservative, I would say, of the Reformations, because Martin Luther was something of a reformer. Martin Luther had problems with the Catholic Church, and he listed those problems in the 95 Theses. Now, that leads you to believe if the problem wasn't mentioned in the 95 Theses, Luther's fine with it, okay? And so Luther wanted various reforms. Now, Calvin and some people that were even more radical than he was, the Anabaptists, for example. The Anabaptists went so far to, first of all, baptize people again, to say that the baptism that people received as an infant, that was not good enough, that you have to be baptized again. And Anabaptists also, Anabaptists also said that they don't owe any allegiance to the state. All right. Some of these groups said we are an autonomous community and we owe no allegiance to any kind of secular authority. So the Anabaptists were very much, when it came to the separation of church and state, like very on the extreme side there. Now, Luther, one thing that was attractive about Luther to some of these folks, that they believed that, when we think about Martin Luther, that's something that he believed, that the state should have, like the temporal rulers should have authority on, basically, if you are the ruler, the secular ruler, then you have authority over secular concerns, and religious leaders have authority over religious concerns. Whereas the Catholic Church believed that the Pope has authority over everything, because Jesus has authority over everything. So they believe that the Pope, as the representative of Jesus Christ on earth, as Catholics see him, that he has authority over everything. Luther says only in spiritual matters. So in any kind of thing to do with governing, taxation, the legitimacy of rulers, Luther says, like, it's not the role of church leaders to intervene. Now, John Calvin, as different as he could be on doctrine, with his doctrines of predestination and whatnot, Calvin did start a religious community where the church and state are basically combined. Now, Henry VIII, remember, the reason why you wouldn't see as much of a difference between a Catholic and an Anglican service is Henry VIII actually, before he, needed to divorce his wife and, start his own church, he actually defended the Catholic Church against Martin Luther. He wrote a very scathing rebuke of Martin Luther in his pamphlet, The Defense of the Seven Sacraments. Okay, so the Catholic Church says the sacraments, the things that are provided by the church, baptism, communion, confession, marriage, holy order, your last rites. There's another one somewhere. Okay, so with that, Luther says, no, there are only really two sacraments, baptism and communion. Those are really the only two things that the church does. And that's something that, as well, when you think about like Protestants, typically when they get divorced, that doesn't have anything to do with the church. Like Protestants typically see marriage as a civil matter, whereas Catholics see marriage as a sacrament. Okay. So the differences between the Italian Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance, and how the Italian Renaissance influenced the Northern Renaissance. So let's go ahead, and I will, I've got a little section on that review guide at that, Marco Learning /AP Euro. One of the things about these guides is that, when we're looking at something like this, I've got a skill box here. So comparison, the Italian Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance were different because Northern Renaissance humanists were more religious and more focused on social reform, while Italian humanists were more focused on secular concerns and individual achievement. Now, that doesn't mean that Italian Renaissance humanists were not religious, okay? Because Petrarch, for example, he wrote like all of these poems that he wrote dedicated to Laura, right? This love of his life. But Petrarch, the last poem in his Canzoniere, which is his book of poetry, the last poem is a very long and very beautiful poem that is dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Okay, so as far as that goes, I mean, Petrarch was not an irreligious person, definitely somebody who was religious, but his writings generally are not as concerned with religion as as Northern Renaissance humanists. And also Italian Renaissance humanists, when you think about when you think about Machiavelli and Castiglione, okay? Now, Machiavelli and Castiglione, which I've got, videos on both of them on my YouTube channel, that they are what you call civic humanists. They were most concerned with, using humanism to be a good political leader. Now, in the case of Machiavelli, how to be a good prince, the person who's in charge. Whereas Castiglione, the book of the courtier. Now, that's something where you're learning how to be a good person that, is trusted by the king or the prince. Now, also, did I mention Romulus Euro yet? This is a little app here, a little word from our sponsor. This is my app. I designed the app. And this is something that is created for the AP Euro, people studying for the AP Euro exam. Very easy study tool, just $2.99 at the App Store and Google Play. And this is basically, you can go to the Renaissance, the Reformation, and it asks you little trivia questions. Okay, so this is something that will be a lot of people have found it helpful. Now, one thing that some people don't understand, the questions aren't stimulus based, not supposed to be. It's a trivia app. And where this is going to help you the most is making sure you got that specific knowledge in your head, that you remember what was this king or that thing or that thing. And that's something that's going to help you on your SAQ, your DVQ, your LAQ. Romulus Euro is available at the App Store. And again, that's my app. And it is, a lot of people found it helpful. Only people who don't like it are people who are expecting stimulus-based questions. But why would you do that with an app? I don't know. But it's just a little trivia app that I designed some years ago that I think would be helpful to you. Now, POV me, the guy that designed it. But then again, I've been teaching Euro for quite a while. So the difference here is when Machiavelli and Castiglione, you were using the classics to gain political power. And also when Machiavelli says things like, a ruler shouldn't always keep his word. If you are a ruler and it is to your advantage to break your word, Machiavelli says do it. Don't cling so much to principle. Machiavelli is kind of inspiring Bismarck later on. Bismarck's idea of realpolitik. Do whatever is going to increase your power. So Machiavellianism is flexible and it's not directly tied to Christian principles. Its sources in the classics. So with that, they're more concerned with individual achievement. Whereas if we look at the Northern Renaissance, when we think about Erasmus, now Erasmus is mentioned in the blue boxes. We need to know who Erasmus of Rotterdam was. So that's why I've got him here on this review guide, that Erasmus of Rotterdam, he wrote The Praise of Folly, which is largely, a large portion of The Praise of Folly is talking about it's poking fun at corruption in the Catholic Church, okay? And specifically, like, he's using classical text. So the Bible is a classical text. Originally, the New Testament was written in Greek. And so the New Testament, like you look at the Gospels, the disciples are poor. Jesus's disciples are poor. And then you look at the bishops who claim to be, in Erasmus's time, successors of the apostles, and they're rich. And Erasmus says, you know what? If you want to be more like the apostles that you claim to be, just spiritually descended from, maybe the bishops should be poor. And so now also Thomas More and Utopia could be helpful for an example from the Northern Renaissance. But remember, Erasmus is the one that is in the blue box. All right. So then again, Northern Renaissance art. Now you see here just kind of a more mundane sort of thing there, that just people, gathering their harvests and stuff like that. Now also Van Eyck, let's see, Van Eyck, the Ghent altarpiece. Okay, Van Eyck's Ghent altarpiece is a great Northern Renaissance, a great Northern Renaissance piece of art here. And you see there that there is Jesus enthroned, there is the Virgin Mary, there is John the Baptist. Now we see, Adam and Eve that, notice they've got their clothes there, right? So that, how they appeared in the garden after they sinned because they're covering up their nakedness. Now, then you see that Jesus is portrayed here as the Lamb of God, being sacrificed for the sins of the world and all of this. So there is, that really went close there. All right. So, but this is kind of the center there where Van Eyck is, there is Jesus as the Lamb of God on the altar. There's the dove representing the Holy Spirit. Okay. And of course, typically God the Father is not going to be portrayed because God the Father is not, is not possessive of a body. So with that, we can see here that is, kind of the difference, but we also want to note the similarity. What are they all inspired by? Both Italian and Northern humanists, they're studying the classics, Greek, Roman, and biblical literature, and they're modeling their writings after classical authors. Now, I go into that a little bit deeper. I go into that I've got a lecture on YouTube, the Italian Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance compared. So remember, you can always take a look at that later on. Okay, so going from there, what was Petrarch's role? Yes. We can't forget Petrarch, the father of humanism. And again, on that, review guide for the Italian Renaissance, I've got Petrarch on there front and center. Now, Petrarch is considered the father of humanism. So humanism, humanism has a daddy, okay? And that daddy is Petrarch. So Petrarch is, is the person who is, who is basically, this guy that's going around and he is discovering old classical texts. And he revives an interest in the Roman philosopher Cicero. Now, another thing about Petrarch that's important here is that Petrarch is, he often, he'll criticize the Middle Ages as the Dark Ages, which is something that today, most historians today would say that, the Renaissance humanists, they overstated some of the differences between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. But Petrarch believed, part of the Renaissance, what makes the Renaissance, a lot of it is they believed that they were rebirthing, okay? And they saw themselves, like the reason why we see the Renaissance as the beginning of modern history, they were the first people to say that. It was during the Renaissance that you have the first, I believe that it was Bruni, if I'm not mistaken, that says that history is divided into three parts: ancient, medieval, and modern. And we still use that today. Now, it's probably about time to break into another part of history, I think. But as far as that goes, now he was also a poet, a writer of sonnets, okay? And again, the father of humanism, okay? The father of humanism. So with that, so when it comes down to that, that remember, the father of humanism, okay? So if humanism's like a little kid, just like walking around lost, and it's like, who's your daddy, kid? And it's like, Petrarch, okay? Well, let's go find your daddy or something, okay? So that is Petrarch, the father of humanism. So going into that, ladies and gentlemen, let's see. So if I share, let's see if I share my screen and then I say that okay, so it's actually, I'm going to say I'm not sharing my screen. Okay, maybe that's what I need to do there to make sure that's all taken care of there. So let's go ahead and, so with that, I would not say, Joseph, that there is a single event setting the Renaissance in motion, but I would say that, Petrarch is definitely credited with starting this, okay? That's a major event. And also those of you on YouTube, that's, just remember y'all can join us on Crowdcast, but I am, just kind of looking through and kind of seeing some questions here and there. Anthro Guitarist looks like a subscriber to my channel who's actually his wife's son is studying for Euro. And so great, glad to see that. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would say that Petrarch would be a catalyst there, but I wouldn't say there's any one event or anything like that. Our last name, yeah, you don't necessarily, I think for any DBQ, LEQ, SAQ, if you know the last name, if you can, if you can describe something in general, yeah, you don't have to know both names of everyone. Just remember that when you're doing the free response, be as specific as you can. Okay. So how specific do I need to be? As specific as you can. Okay. So yeah, so Machiavelli is fine. You don't have to say Niccolo Machiavelli or anything like that. Okay. So as far as that goes, why is Richey not a rapper? I've asked the same thing about Super Hot Fire. It's like he's not a rapper, but he does rap things and all of that kind of stuff, right? Oh, yes. Okay. Can we use, okay, so Americans, now British people do this as well, because let's keep in mind that 85% of the population of the UK is England. So when you hear like English people talking, they talk about being English. Okay. So with that, one thing to note here that, yeah, they can't, I mean, your reader is not going to say, well, they said England where they should have said Britain. But one thing that we'll note, the Act of Union happened about the same time as the War of the Spanish Succession. So if this is after Louis the 14th, then what we want to note here is we pretty much would say Britain, okay, or the UK or something like that. Britain or UK is more appropriate for after the age of absolutism, whereas if we're talking about the Reformation, like Henry VIII, that's England, because Henry VIII was not the king of England and Scotland. Henry VIII is only the king of England. Okay, so that was before like the Stuarts and the Act of Union and all of that. So if you want to be precise, just note Reformation, that's going to be England. But then we're going to be talking about Britain if it's, after the age of absolutism. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are, starting to come to a close here, but let me see what we've got. We've got Adrian, Alex Valadez. All right, Alex Valadez and Muhammad Ali with some periods there. So as far as that goes, way too wicked. In Sports 6, Julia, row her 7. Ariobo is here. Bree Demaro following. Thank y'all. Stefan, that's a lot of likes. I appreciate the engagement. And Gage, thank you so much. Kate _ Odell. So with that, Jasmine maybe _ something like that. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, since y'all are here, I'll be, emailing and that sort of thing. I'll be posting updates on Instagram. So just make sure, there will be some live broadcasts. I've got one scheduled for exactly 1 week from tonight. We'll also start at 8:30. And I believe I've chosen the topic for that one already, but I forget what it was, but I think it's in there. So we'll be getting together again, in a week, and hopefully I'll be taking up the whole screen and that sort of thing again. I am taking up the whole screen again. Okay, great. So this has been a little bit of a bizarre setup today, but I appreciate y'all working with me. And this has been a really good time. And I hope that y'all have had a good time as well. Let's do a few chat shout outs because I want to make sure that the teachers who encouraged y'all to the teachers who encouraged y'all to come here get shout outs. Yeah, the French Revolution. I do. Yeah, so the French Revolution, I do have that going on there. And so yes, Gage got that shout out. So with that, arts including Baroque, we'll do that at another time. Baroque's going to come a little bit later, even though that is the Reformation, isn't it? So with that, goodbye. Let's see. Miss Anderson, thank you very much. And Violet, goodbye to you, and you are welcome. Mr. Brooks got a shout out. Let's see. Dustin Tuggle. All right. So yeah, we want to make sure to show y'all's teachers some love, ladies and gentlemen. So that's the main reason I'm hanging back at the moment. So how can we show our teachers a little bit of love? Because they're, they must be awesome because they asked you to come here, and they have been very good to me. Mr. Miller, Miss Mitchell, Mr. Brayfogle, Mrs. Stewart, Mrs. Matthews, Mrs. Dobrin. Thank you so much. All right. And, with all of that, ladies and gentlemen, let's see, a million, or what is that? More than a trillion. Mr. Labor. Okay. So Mr. DeStefano, thank you so much. Miss Ferrara, thank you. And Miss Bautista, Miss Britt, thank y'all so much for everything you're doing. Mr. Solkowski, please. Okay, I think Stella deserves some extra credit, maybe so. Mr. Zins, Mr. Klotz, Miss Bautner, thank y'all so much. Miss Chipatine, 3 exclamation marks. I thought those were some L's there afterwards. But of course, Miss Chipatine's class doesn't take any L's. So of course, those are exclamation marks. All the Euro classes love her, LOL. Mr. Williamson, you can't spell W without Williamson, right? Or is it the other way around? Okay. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all so much, Mrs. Roberts, and all of you great. Jessica Cozy has been an amazing AP Euro teacher. Thank you, Gage, who just got a shout out and all of that kind of stuff. Mr. Burke, are we talking about Edmund Burke? We're ready for the French Revolution here, aren't we? Miss Balkner, thank you very, very much. And Mrs. Palmer. Now, Alston, is this Mrs. Palmer in the Greenville area, St. Joseph's? Because that's not so far away from me. Love her. All right. So with that, thank y'all so much. Common Sulky W. All right. So, thanks so much for coming. And again, we're only beginning to review, and we're looking for, Miss Canoop, or is it Noop? Is it Canoop or Noop? But she has been so awesome to me for so many years. So thank her for me, Miss Godwin and Miss Stewart. Okay, so bye. I love you too, Edward. And ladies and gentlemen, it is always a pleasure.